Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. I wanted to talk about the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. Back when I was still a professor, before I retired, in other words, um, there was an article in the textbook that I used to use for my social problems classes, uh, which was called From a Native Daughter. And From a Native Daughter was excerpted from a book by the same title, which I read, and I would strongly recommend that you read it as well. Hunani K. Trask. Just look up From a Native Daughter, you'll find it. It's a really, really good book. And Trask has also written other books as well. Sadly, she died at the age of only 71 years old 2 years ago. And I just found out that she died. I did not know that she died until about a moment ago when I looked her up and saw that she was deceased. I was very disappointed in that. Her and her sister both were leaders in the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. And I'll tell you a bit about her and her thought, and I'll give you a tentative take that I have on her perspective. Hunani K. Trask was born in Hawaii. And what she says is that when she was growing up, she was taught all these lies about Hawaii, that the Hawaiian tribal chiefs were evil, that they abused women, that they dragged them around by their hair, that people were manipulated, that the chiefs kept all the money to themselves. And she learned this at a missionary school in Hawaii. I assume it was Roman Catholic missionary school because those were the missionary schools in Hawaii, but I don't know that. She doesn't say. But I assume that it was a Roman Catholic missionary school. She says that her grandmother told her an entirely different story about Hawaii, that the chiefs were kind and generous, and they did not abuse anybody. So what happened to Hunani K. Trask? She went to the mainland, got a Ph.D. in history, moved back to Hawaii, and again, with her sister, became one of the leaders of the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. Her argument is that the Hawaiians were lied to by the Americans. And the United States basically took over Hawaii under false pretenses, literally stole the land from Hawaii and from the Hawaiians, and that she knows that, and she saw her life mission as propagating the idea of Hawaiian sovereignty. That was her goal in life. Her views were very strong. If you listen to her speeches, they are very radical, even revolutionary, which I like. Talking about the how much she hates America. She repeatedly stated her hatred for America, a sentiment which I share. As an American, I must say I share that. I am not a big fan of my country either. In fact, I think that if I were to pick two countries right now that I think are the worst countries in the world, I would pick the United States and Israel right now. Now, I think the US would always remain on that list. Maybe the other country might change from time to time, but usually Israel would be somewhere up there. for the way Israel is treating the Palestinians in Gaza. But that's off topic. The United States, according to Hunani K. Trask, basically brought Hawaii into the United States, eventually made it a state. But Hunani K. Trask has refused to acknowledge the statehood of Hawaii for herself. Now, does that really matter in a legal sense? No. But it matters from the standpoint of establishing a sense of self, a sense of nationhood among Hawaiians. And I have listened to some very, very strong speeches given by Hunani K. Trask. And again, I would strongly recommend reading her book From a Native Daughter, which kind of expresses her ideas in the clearest form I've ever seen them. It's a very, very good book, very powerful book. And she talks about her negative feelings about white people, and that there is a day every year, which is basically, and I will use the English term because I'm afraid I'll mispronounce the Hawaiian term, Hate Whitey Day. It's something like Heoli, but that's probably not correct, so I apologize if I mispronounced it. It was not intentional. But Hate Whitey Day. And that on that day, most, or the majority of, I guess, white families will not send their kids to school because they know that if they send their kids to school on Hate Whitey Day, that their kids will most likely get beaten up. That is the extent of the hatred which exists and which still exists, not among all Hawaiians, certainly, but among many people, many Native Hawaiians. I have never had the pleasure of visiting Hawaii. Maybe I will someday, but I haven't yet. The sad thing is that when most people visit Hawaii, they go on tours. What happens when they go on tours? They go to a resort and they're entertained by hula dancers and they're given a lei around their necks. And they are presented with a view of Hawaii, which is very positive toward the mainland. Well, obviously, these people are paid to do that. That's their job. But what American tourists from the mainland do not see when they go to Hawaii is that there is tremendous poverty in Hawaii, and that, as might be expected, the majority of people who are poor are Native Hawaiians. The people who are wealthy are white people from the mainland. Again, that's a picture that is not hard to imagine because we see it repeated over and over again throughout the world, not only with American colonialism, and Hawaii is the product of American colonialism, but with colonialism all over the place. And so what Hunani K. Trask basically argued for was that Hawaii should be independent, that it should not remain as a state, which she didn't recognize anyway, but it should not remain as a state in the United States. It should be an independent country. She said that when she went to graduate school and got her Ph.D. on the mainland, she learned that her grandmother was right, and that all the lies that were told to her at that missionary school were just that, lies. She also said that she met a number of professional historians, other people with PhDs in history, in many cases specializing in the history of Hawaii, who also bought into the idea, the lie, that the chiefs were evil people who treated the members of their tribes like their own property. And she would sometimes confront them, and sometimes she would not. But it's just a very, very sad tale. But its sadness, I think, is the reason to read it. I think that we all need to learn about Hawaii. And we all need to learn about the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. And Hulani K. Trask and her sister are not the only people involved in it. There are a lot of other people who are activists in that movement. So the fact that she is deceased, in a sense, matters, because she was a very important leader, but in a sense, it does not matter that much, because there are many people who will replace her work, who will carry on her work. And whether the Hawaiian sovereignty movement will be successful, well, I'm not a prognosticator or a prophet, so I have no idea. I have my doubts, to be honest. I've never seen, we haven't seen in the United States a state secede from the Union successfully. Of course, we saw the Confederacy secede. And then we had a civil war, a justifiable civil war, based on the issue of slavery, which ended eventually slavery in the Confederacy. My only feeling is, and I realize this is a bit of a sidetrack, that I don't think that the Confederacy should have been allowed back into the Union. I think once the slaves were freed, the Confederacy should have been left on its own. I think we see the tragedy of what has happened. The extreme far right wing, which exists in many parts of the South, but not only the South, sadly, also parts of the Midwest. And at least in the South, the United States would not have to deal with those people, those self-described rednecks, many of whom, not all, many of whom don't care much for the US. You go into their homes and they have Confederate flags on their walls. So they place the Confederacy, it seems to me, on a higher level than the US. Now, they might argue with me on that, I don't know. But that's my impression as someone who has lived in Georgia twice and Mississippi once. And I have seen those Confederate flags on those walls myself, with my own eyes. And it was not a pleasant sight. But back to Hawaii. I have tremendous empathy for the people of Hawaii, and especially for the way in which Trask describes the traditional Hawaiian view of the land. As she says it, to traditional Hawaiians, the land was everything. That is not, by the way, unusual in many indigenous cultures. It's not universal. Every culture is distinct and should not be conflated with one another. But certainly, Hawaii was like that. That love of the land has basically been destroyed by U.S. imperialism, by U.S. colonialism, where the indigenous people of Hawaii were robbed of their birthright. But to people in the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, it's still alive. The love of the land, the appreciation of the land, and the feeling that the land belongs to Hawaiians, not to people in North America, not to people in Washington, D.C., and that it should stay in the hands of Hawaiians or be returned to the hands of Hawaiians. So that's basically what I wanted to say, to present that as an example of what is sometimes called indigenism. Indigenism is a perspective which supports the rights of indigenous people. And I can say that I guess I am an indigenous of sorts, although I'm not indigenous to where I live. In a sense, we are all indigenous somewhere. And I guess I'm indigenous somewhere myself. I guess somewhere in the Near East, somewhere way back when. But I'm certainly not indigenous to North America. I am living on stolen land too. Land that was stolen from Native Americans, or from what some Native Americans prefer to call American Indians. So this kind of situation, which exists in Hawaii, while not unique, is very informative. And it should teach us about the importance of protecting indigenous cultures. Because even now, many indigenous cultures are being destroyed. Another sidetrack. I saw a movie called The Green Light Exhibition. Or I'm sorry, The Green Light Expedition, back in the 1970s. Really good movie. It was actually produced by a friend of mine named Mark Sedan, who unfortunately has had some recent difficulties in his life, which I will not go into here. But the movie was a wonderful movie. And the people who went on that trip, basically Mark Sedan and this woman with him, a native of Canada, Montreal, Canada. Mark Sedan was from the New York City area, like myself. They were very careful not to disturb or not to disrupt the lives of the people along the Amazon River. Many of them had been living that way for who knows how long, thousands of years, I don't know, maybe longer than that. Many of them spoke in these very unusual languages. One language that I heard was basically clicks of the mouth. I will not attempt to repeat it out of a fear of disrespecting them. But they were pure and innocent in a sense. I don't want to put them on a pedestal. It's wrong to put anybody on a pedestal. But they had the innocence of not being disrupted by the first world. Now, you go back to that same area. It's a different world. They have TVs, they have computers, they speak Spanish or Portuguese. They're living lives similar to other people in Latin America. Why? Because the governments down there decided that they cared more about logging than they did about the indigenous peoples living on the Amazon River. So they began tearing down the rainforests to collect wood, to collect timber. At the same time as they tore down the rainforests, they tore down the cultures of the people living there. So, point is that the situation in Hawaii is one that occurred quite a while ago. The one in the Amazon is one that occurred more recently. So the first world, or whatever you want to call, maybe the third world in Latin America, the industrialized world, is still committing the same atrocities as the US committed in Hawaii. We have not stopped doing that. We put capitalism ahead of people, which is profit. Now, what happens in the Amazon is not exactly colonialism, but it's pretty close, pretty close. And it just breaks my heart to know how many people are suffering on the Amazon River Basin area right now, and how many people suffered in Hawaii when their cultures were literally taken from beneath their feet. Cultures which the United States literally had no right to, but didn't care. In other words, we don't seem to care when we steal things in the US. We just take what we want. Just like Israel is now taking Gaza. Israel doesn't care. 80% of all Israelis support what Israel is doing in Gaza. Even though Benjamin Netanyahu himself has a low rating as a politician, that has nothing to do with the war in Gaza. In fact, part of the reason why Bibi Netanyahu has that low political score is because of the fact that Hamas invaded Israel and killed Israeli citizens. And there was a feeling that Israel did not do enough to protect Israelis. Well, what are those same Israelis doing now to protect the people in Gaza? Nothing that I know of. So this story, though primarily about Hawaii, was not exclusively about Hawaii, and it took some detours, some, I think, necessary detours, to explain that we are really creatures of profit, not creatures of people. People are second to profit. And that is why, in my opinion, the first world needs to lose its position of ascendancy, which might well mean the end of the first world, whatever the end of the first world means. I don't know what that means. Nobody knows what it means. Nobody can even be sure that it will end, but I think it will end. I think dialectic will end it. What will replace it? I hope communism. I hope the third world will establish communism, including in Hawaii, and that Hawaiians will be placed back into a position of control over their own lives. This has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.